Columbia, South Carolina's real estate market is finally flashing warning signs. Are we the next domino behind Florida and Texas? The reality out there is inventory has surged, and it's not just a little bit. We're talking 40% increases. We're seeing more homes hit the market than we've seen in years. Competition among sellers is climbing. Neighborhoods that once moved in days are now seeing homes sit longer and longer. Agents are fighting with sellers. And if you were waiting for cracks in the market, this might be the first sign. So the question is, are we finally seeing the slowdown in Columbia, South Carolina? Columbia, South Carolina's housing market isn't slowing down at all. It's actually accelerating. Pending sales are climbing higher than we've seen in the last 2 years. And average sales prices aren't just holding steady. They've grown more this year than either of the last two. Buyers are active in our market. 50% of our homes are selling in under 30 days. And sellers are walking away with stronger returns than most people would expect when they've been watching videos online. If you were waiting for proof that Columbia's market still has momentum and this might be the perfect time to buy, this is it. So what's the reality? I mean, market report videos, they can be spun however you really want to. But my goal isn't to play either of those games, nor sell you an app or a monthly subscription. Then we're not doing spin tactics here. No clickbait hype to just crank views. Just the straight truth about what's actually happening right here in Columbia's housing market, helping you cut through the noise to truly determine if it's the right time to buy or sell. Because in the end, that's what you really want to know. All right, let's get the raw numbers out of the way first, and then we'll talk about the true boots on the ground reality that numbers alone can't explain. Then we'll tackle the looming market crash talks. Because data is helpful, but if you've watched this channel for a while, you know stats don't always tell the whole story of what it actually feels like to buy or sell in Columbia right now. But let's get started with new listings. New listings are up 15.2% compared to last year. Pending sales are up 11.6%. showing that buyers are still very active, even with more homes hitting the market. Now, active inventory, it has jumped 39.3%, but we're still only sitting about 3,550 homes for sale across the entire market. And for reference, only about 25% of our inventory is new construction homes out there. And here's the other kicker that we'll get into later. 40% of the current homes under contract right now are new construction. But now, as far as pricing, so the median sales price in the last month did dip 0.2%, but it still remains up 2.2% for the year. But the average sales price at the same time climbed 3.8% for the month and is up 3.9% year to date, showing that while some individual months do fluctuate as we've seen over the year, overall pricing is still trending upward. Now, as far as supply and demand, we currently sit at 3.1 months worth of inventory. And for context, 6 months is what most people consider a balanced market. Anytime you have more than 6 months, it favors buyers, as usually it puts downward pressure on prices. Below 6 months, it favors the sellers, and it supports the price growth that we've been seeing. So at 3.1 months, we're still well inside a seller market territory, which explains why long-term pricing remains competitive despite more homes hitting the market. Now, let's hit some local area highlights, and then we'll circle back to the boots on the ground insight. We're gonna hit some of the areas that you talk about most when you call. So we'll get started with Irmo, and their median price is up 0.8%. Lexington, their median price is up 6.4%. Now, Northeast Columbia, their median price is actually down 4.6 this month. But again, as we talked about before, their year-to-date is still up 1.4%. And keep in mind, we did see variances in Lexington earlier this year too, so it's not something I'm reading too much into, but something to keep an eye on. Now let's talk Lake Murray. Over on the Irmo and Chapin side, their pricing is up 1.8%. Now let's talk about Lake Murray on the Lexington side. They had a massive 65.8% spike for the month. But remember, the lake has massive discrepancies and can be driven either way by a few high-end sales or, as we saw earlier in the year, low-end sales, because year-to-date is still sitting at 18.7%. Now, views on videos prove most people just want the clickbait headlines, but I'd rather just give you the numbers as they are without the spin to it. But let's talk about what it feels like in real life, because in the end of the day, the numbers are helpful, but averages don't always tell you what buyers are dealing with on a daily basis, or sellers are actually feeling, or in the end, where we could actually be headed next that we're gonna cover. This is where boots on the ground insight truly matters, and where the story behind those percentages really comes to life. Remember, the market can always be spun two ways. And I'm here to strip out the spin and give you the straight facts. And the fact is, buyers and sellers are still in a bit of standoff locally. Rates stayed higher for longer than many people hope. So a lot of buyers are still hesitant, just being honest. At the same time, plenty of sellers still aren't willing to budge on their prices. And here's the kicker. Some sellers can still get away with it, while others unfortunately can't. That's why national headlines don't tell the full story. Yes, we've all seen the numbers coming out of places like Florida, Texas, Arizona, others that look like true buyer's market territory. I mean, I recently spoke with a client in Arizona where homes are routinely sitting for 90+ days before selling. But at the same time, I have clients in the Northeast selling, and they're still dealing with multiple offer situations. But let's break through that noise. What about right here in Columbia? And honestly, we're kind of somewhere in between. I mean, some of my buyers are still facing stiff competition. Others are able to negotiate a bit. We're talking $5,000 to $10,000 off here and there, but nothing crazy extreme. And yes, I've had buyers try the lowball approach on homes, some that have honestly been sitting nearly a year, only to get rejected. Sellers right now have the ability to be stubborn, and many are using it, where some, just to be honest, are finally caving, creating the perception of dropping prices in some area. I've seen the comments in here. But here's what the raw numbers don't show you when you look at that, or that broad scale picture of what you see on Zillow. When you scrape away the stale listings, of all the homes currently under contract in our market, 38% went under contract in 2 weeks or less. That's right. And a staggering 53% went under contract within 30 days. That tells you where the demand really is. I personally call it the two markets. You have the real market, homes that are well priced, good condition, and in areas buyers actually want to buy in. These are the homes pushing the median price higher and creating the competition we're truly seeing out there. They're kind of holding the weight of the market, preventing it from looking like Florida and others. Then you have what I call the phantom market, the clickbait market, the overpriced or poor condition tired listings that sit month after month. I mean, buyers see these and assume the market is frozen. I mean, I hear it daily when people call. The online pictures look phenomenal, so it seems like a big shift. But from my experience, it's because those aren't the homes buyers truly want when they walk in that front door. I mean, I literally had a client in the last few months where we looked at 3 houses in the exact same neighborhood. 2 had been on the market over 30 days, and 1 had just come up about 10 days prior. And they bought the home that came on the market 10 days prior. It's the reality that we're seeing out there. And again, some sellers refuse to accept that reality. They blame their agent, they blame interest rate, and they sit tight hoping the market will catch up. Or maybe their agent will jump in their pool on TikTok and get 10,000 views and the buyers will come rolling in. But here's another harsh reality, and I mentioned it earlier. While national headlines scream about builders overbuilding, slashing prices, and struggling to sell, our local numbers tell a different story right now. Right now, roughly 40% of all pending sales here are new construction. And you say, well, why is that versus what we're hearing nationally? Builder incentives. I mean, with mortgage rate buydowns and closing cost packages on the table, many buyers, including about half of mine, are looking at new construction. Because when you go look at a 2 or 3-year-old resale, you think, why pay full market rate on this mortgage when I can get a brand new home in the same neighborhood or one just around the corner with a lower monthly payment? And that dynamic is pulling demand away from resales and putting extra pressure on sellers of slightly older homes. Because even if their list price is competitive, they can't compete with the builder's financing deals. And the reality is, if those sellers just bought a few years ago, many of them don't have room to drop price. That's why most new homes here, the prices continue to rise, not drop like we're seeing in other markets. But that's where we shift next, because eventually there has to be a breaking point, right? A moment when enough sellers finally hit the wall and are forced to adjust their expectation, and prices start to drop just to move stale inventory, when they can't hold on any longer. Is that when the broader numbers will finally show the slowdown so many people are waiting for? Is that when the 50% still holding the market up can't sustain anymore? Or is this just a dream that people online are hoping for? Look, if you're tired of the hype, stick with me, because this is where we're separating reality from the noise out there. Now, let's talk about the question everyone keeps asking. Is this finally the start of a housing crash? And the truth, it depends on what numbers you look at and how long you zoom out. Headlines love to scream about huge percent increases in foreclosures. But the reality is that today's foreclosure filings are still below pre-pandemic levels. Yes, the current percentages compared to the last few years sound scary, but when you start from near record lows we had over the past few years, even small uptick look dramatic when you put them up on the big screen. Inventory is climbing across the country. We've already seen it in our numbers too. And in some markets, prices are already sliding. But the differences from one city to the next are pretty staggering right now. Some areas are clearly in buyer's markets. Some are headed in that direction fast, while others, like here in the Midlands, are kind of holding steady. And the next 6 months will tell us whether this stays as hyperlocal corrections in micro pockets or begins to spread and no one across the country is safe. Here's the piece most headlines like to skip right now across the US. We've seen a record number of delistings. Millions of homeowners out there are sitting on 3% or lower mortgage rates. And if they don't have to sell, many simply won't. Others are renting their homes out for more than their current mortgage payments and just simply moving on from that. That means not every seller is gonna have to face reality as many hope. I mean, I personally had a buyer recently who was trying to relocate from Florida, hoping to save from rising insurance rates like so many others. But the math didn't math out when they couldn't sell their house for the numbers they wanted. So they just delisted their home and stayed in Florida instead. So many will just sit tight or simply become landlords. Now, we have to layer in the most recent twist. The Fed has finally signaled it's ready to start easing rates, and mortgage rates have already seen some of the steepest drops in years in anticipation of this. And if rates drift back towards even 5%, the math changes fast. I mean, on a median price home in the US, which is about $425,000 right now, dropping from a 7.5% rate to a 5% rate cuts the payment by about $700 a month. That's enough to pull a lot of currently priced out buyers back into the market. So where does that leave us? That's why I say calling a crash is truly tricky and almost dangerous. Yes, some markets will see price drops as inventory builds. We've seen it. But with so many locked-in sellers, strong rental demand, and the possibility of lower rates, a broad national collapse isn't a sure bet, especially considering recent news of new construction builders slowing down their starts in those more stagnant markets, trying to prevent a repeat of '08 with overbuilding as demand increases. And I know many of them are still very optimistic about the future. Now, circling back here in Colombia, we're still watching that tug of war between rising inventory and stubborn sellers. And which side wins will depend heavily on what happens with rates, jobs, and buyer confidence over the next few months. But consistently being ranked as a relocation state and recently being ranked as one of the top states buyers are eyeing gives confidence that demand is going to stay high relative to supply. And here's another reality check that doesn't seem to hit the headlines. So before the pandemic, our market here in Colombia was already averaging about a 6% appreciation per year. And that was actually steadily increasing, where we wrapped up the end of 2019 with a 6.5% increase. Now, yeah, we had the same wild spikes in 2020 and 2021. But when you smooth out the roller coaster and the ebbs and flows over the last couple years, and you look at the full 5-year span, we're really only about one good year ahead of where we would have been if things had just kept climbing at that normal pace. So despite all the headlines and panic, the last few years kind of just balanced us back toward the tread line. So a correction would really only bring us back slightly. So the question is, are prices crashing and struggling, or are they really just catching back up to where steady growth would have taken us anyways? And this is where I have to pause for a second, because I've honestly held back on saying this for a long time, but I just honestly can't anymore. When did it become acceptable to root for someone else to lose just so that you can win? I mean, when did we decide it's okay to hope that 85 million homeowners have to lose their equity just so that you can get a cheaper deal on a house? Sure, for people like me who bought back in 2019 and have been paying extra towards our mortgage, the market could drop 50% and we'd still be in the green. But the reality is that's not the majority. In fact, less than half of homeowners are in that position. I mean, think about military families who have to move every 2 to 4 years when they're serving our country. They're building equity, doing everything right, and now you're hoping they walk away upside down so you can score a bargain? And I know the counterpoint. Well, Brandon, it's the corporations we want to take down. They are buying all the homes. And I get it. I hear that chatter and read the passive aggressive comments. But here's the reality when you strip away the clickbait fear post. Where this conversation all started from and stemmed from came from a neighborhood that was actually intentionally built as a rental community. The investor paid the builder to do this. They didn't come in and buy the entire neighborhood, overbidding every buyer. But I get it. You still hear it daily. The number of investors buying homes. BlackRock will own everything, you will own nothing and be happy. But the reality is the term investors is a blanket term used for both corporations, a kid that inherited a home from their parents, or your neighbor who decided to buy a home up the block and rent it out for some extra income. When you look at the raw data, they say only about 26% of homes are actually sold to investors nationwide. Now, half of those are those small scale mom and pop landlords I talked about who own less than 9 properties. And only 11% of that are big corporations. But when you break those numbers down to actually making offers on homes across the board, it would be about 75% of the competition is other owner occupants trying to buy that home. 12% offering would be the small mom and pop landlords we talked about. And only 2 to 3% of offers would be those institutional buyers. But let's be real. Anyone that knows anything about real estate who has paid attention for just a little bit of time knows investors, especially on the institutional side, don't go in and overbid on homes. They typically buy properties that are cheap and usually in need of work. Because what they'll pay for that house at full market value is not going to turn them a profit, especially nowadays. Rent prices have just about frozen. And the reality is we're seeing some investors actually sell a property as that happens. And here's another reality of them buying up all the homes as rentals. In areas of high rentals, the average price of the neighborhood tends to be less than those that have less rentals. And we see it locally. Owner occupied drives prices higher than rental occupied. So don't always buy into the fear and the blame game of investors. It's more complex than that. As I said, interest rates are a big driving factor. But what no one wants to hear is most of it comes down to supply and demand. And right now in many areas, we're seeing local governments and local citizens putting their foots down on new construction developments. While I get it, nobody wants overgrowth. Many of us left states that had that. But the reality is all this does in the end is limit supply and drives up prices with continued demand. Now, back to topic about a market crash. I understand wanting affordability. Trust me, as a real estate agent and someone who moved across the country chasing affordability, we all want that. It's called the American dream for a reason, and it's why many of us get into real estate to help make that reality true for so many people. But are you literally asking for it at the expense of your fellow neighbors who worked their ass off to buy that home? Because the reality is, the boomers many of you blame in the comments, they'll be fine. At this point, many of them don't even have mortgages. It's the people that bought over the last handful of years that you're truly wishing against. And I get it. I'm just a real estate agent, and many of you think I'm just begging to keep my job. But the reality is, after the '08 crash, closings dipped as low as 4.34 million sales. Last year, we had 4.06 million homes. And I had one of my best years in real estate. So this isn't about me. People will always buy and sell homes no matter how much you fight online. This is real estate. And I get there's negotiations. And we will always fight hard for our clients. But I think it feels like we're living through a larger cultural shift. Many of you feel it, where concern for others often takes a backseat to self-interest. But I digress and want to move back to topic. So let's clear the air and answer the real question most people are asking right now. When is the best time to buy? And here's the reality nobody wants to admit, as it doesn't sell apps, subscriptions online, or get the views everyone wants. The best time to buy will always be in hindsight. What do I mean by that? Let's rewind back to the 80s. Mortgage rates peaked at nearly 19% in 1981. 19%. Buyers froze, sales slumped, and affordability tanked worse than we see today. And yet, even through that storm, home values kept rising over the decade. By the end of the decade, even with interest rates dropping, the market for commercial properties in some housing markets still became severely depressed. with falling prices and rising vacancy rates. And yet, this is the time when most people online claim life was so much easier to buy back then. Now, fast forward to recent times, 2019 into early 2020. Looking back now, that was probably one of the best buying windows in modern history for anyone. Homes skyrocketed afterward. And if you bought then and sold, call it 2024, you'd be sitting on some of the biggest gains in a short-term period, possibly ever. But I can tell you, as someone who was an agent during that time, buyers were nervous then too. Foreclosures were higher than they were today. Prices were climbing. Sales were slowing down. And the same conversation we're hearing now, the doubt, the speculation were happening then. Then came early 2020, the pandemic announcement. Buyers froze, sellers pulled their listing, builders stopped building with fears of a crash. Everyone thought the housing market was about to collapse. And some of those videos you share with me, yeah, they were screaming crash back then too. But instead, the exact opposite happened. As we know now, prices took off like a rocket. And here's the kicker. It always seems like the best times to buy are the time when hardly anyone actually is, when hesitation is the highest. That's usually when the biggest opportunities are sitting right in front of people. It's the reason market crashes are market crashes, because no one is actually buying. Hence this wild concept of all the people saying, I can't wait for a crash to buy. The reality is, if everyone saying this is truly buying, it's not gonna be a crash. I mean, look back at history. When buyers who pushed past the fears and the concern, that's when they came out ahead. And when we look at today's numbers, sales in 2024 fell to their lowest point since 1995. That's almost 3 decades, and even less than when we were in that true buying crash of 2008. Since then, we've only seen a slight bump upward of closings. So the question becomes, will this be another one of those hindsight moments? Will people look back 5 years from now and say, that was the window? That's when the real opportunity was. Those lucky millennials who had it so easy. Or is this the brink of disaster and foolish to buy? In the end, only time will tell, not your local clickbait videos.